So, you want to make a D&D character and you want to make a lot of attacks with people openers. But you also want to throw in the occasional spell, not enough to be considered a wizard or anything, just enough to spice things up a bit. Well, there's a subclass for that, the ELDRITCH KNIGHT FIGHTER. Hi there, I'm just a second level fighter who likes talking about Dungeons and Dragons, and if you'd like to see more content like this, then consider subscribing to my channel. But enough of that, because today we're covering a very spicy fighter subclass. The Eldritch Knight is a warrior that tickles you with the promise of mixing sword and sorcery. It hooks you in with a very flavorful and specific fantasy that takes elements from the wizard and warrior archetypes and produces something that mixes the two together. Kind of. Many players refer to the subsequent archetype as a gish, but that isn't exactly how the Eldritch Knight plays in 5e. You see, the Eldritch Knight is actually a laughably bad spellcaster at the end of the day. They lack any powerful offensive or control-based spells, but what they specialize in is enhancing their own fighting abilities. They take the lessons of arcane magic, misinterpret them, and just use them to turn themselves into better fighters. And while they may be somewhat disappointing if you're planning on slinging devastating spells, the truth is that Eldritch Knights make incredibly strong fighters, especially at higher levels where they scale to some dizzying heights. Anyhow, today we're going to dive deep and figure out what makes this subclass tick and how to build one. Alright, let's jump into the features that the Eldritch Knight gets at 3rd level. Warbond is an entirely unique ability that allows an Eldritch Knight to conduct an hour-long ritual in which they bond with a weapon. They can do this with up to 2 different weapons, and while wielding either of those weapons, they cannot be disarmed unless incapacitated. In addition, they can use a bonus action to magically summon either of those weapons into a free hand, as long as it's on the same plane of existence. Your favorite people opener is never out of reach, just snap your fingers and start swinging. Then they also get spellcasting. This is the defining feature of an Eldritch Knight and is what sets them apart from other fighters. However, this feature has some extreme restrictions. For starters, you are a 1/3 caster. Your spell progression is excruciatingly slow, you have less spell slots than other casters bar warlocks, and you only get your higher level spell slots at much higher levels than other spellcasters. You draw your spells from the wizard spell list, and intelligence is your spellcasting ability. So your options are quite varied, even though you inevitably cap out at only 4th level spells. Now, just a warning, because you're going to be focusing on using weapons, your intelligence might be low, further adding to the weak spellcasting conundrum, unless you make some specific choices. Moving on to level 7, you get War Magic. Now, this feature is what gives you some genuine teeth when it comes to mechanical power. This feature lets you simply replace one attack made with the attack action with a cantrip that takes an action to cast. Due to a handful of cantrips that we'll discuss later, this straight up gives you extra damage. As such, level 7 is a bit of a power spike for the Eldritch Knight, and this trend continues when your cantrips get stronger at 11th and 17th level. This progression in power is in addition to the regular progression you get from the base fighter class. In other words, the Eldritch Knight starts out being mediocre, but scales harder than its counterparts, and it shines in tier 3 and 4 play. One last thing, the cantrip you cast with this feature doesn't require the magic action, so you can use Action Surge to cast 2 spells a turn. Something almost no other character can do thanks to the changes in the 2024 Player's Handbook. Then, at 10th level, you get Eldritch Strike. This means that any creature hit by one of your weapon attacks has disadvantage on the next saving throw they make against a spell you cast before the end of your next turn. This may sound reasonably strong, but it really isn't. At this level, you only have access to 2nd level spells, none of which have the same punch they had when your party's wizard was casting them back at 3rd level. The disadvantage also won't make up for the fact that you probably won't have the best spell save DC. So yeah, it isn't amazing. At 15th level, you get Arcane Charge. This feature allows you to teleport up to 30 feet either right before or right after you use the extra action granted by Action Surge. This is actually decent and provides some great mobility at a key moment. However, if you're taking the attack action, then you can't split up those attacks and teleport in between. You have to finish them all and then teleport. So keep that in mind. Finally, Improved War Magic is the capstone feature you get at 18th level. I won't lie, but this feature kinda sucks. It's supposed to be a better version of your 7th level feature, and technically it is. So it lets you cast a 1st or 2nd level spell that takes an action to cast as part of the attack action by replacing 2 attacks. At this level, you make 3 attacks with the attack action. You can basically cast a spell and also make 1 attack. The main problem is that the spell options are either just uninspiring or they don't take an action to cast and therefore don't qualify for this feature. Don't get me wrong, you're probably going to cast a defensive spell with this and lose only 2 attacks instead of 3, but in no reality is that an exciting capstone to have. Funnily enough though, you can still combine this with regular war magic, which is nice, I guess. Okay, let's cover some interesting spell options to take at every point in the game. Now these are just my opinions and not all of them are great. Some I included because they're thematic, but some are absolutely going to worm their way into almost every Eldritch Knight's arsenal. For cantrips there are three main options that you generally build off of. All three require you to make a weapon attack as part of the spell and then add an effect of some kind. They also add extra damage to the attack from 5th level onwards. Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade are purely melee options that also don't allow you to use the reach property of polearm type weapons. They cover the weapon in either thunder or fire energy. Booming Blade makes it so that if the target moves they take extra damage, and Green Flame Blade cleaves a secondary target for some extra damage, scaling a bit with intelligence. If you're going melee, I generally think taking both of these is a good idea as you'll probably be more versatile. Then True Strike is interesting. It works in almost the same way as the previous two, but you can choose for your weapon's damage type to entirely change to radiant, and it deals more radiant damage later on. However, you have to use your intelligence modifier for the attack and damage rolls. This poses a bit of a problem unless you're focusing on intelligence, which is an option. More than that, the spell only ends up dealing extra d6s, whereas Booming and Green Flame Blade deal d8s. But True Strike works with all weapons, not just the melee ones, so pick your poison. Moving on to first level spells, there are three really great defensive options to cover that all use your reaction to cast. Field gives you a flat +5 to your AC when you are targeted with an attack, in addition to making you immune to the magic missile spell. This lasts until the start of your next turn and is pretty awesome. Absorb Elements is similar, but instead of AC it gives you resistance to acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage until the start of your next turn. The damage type is the same that you are about to take when you cast this spell. Then, the next attack you make deals an extra d6 damage of the same type. This, however, will end the spell early. Okay, Silvery Barbs is a bit of a sore spot for some players and DMs. This spell is cast when you see a creature within 60 feet of you that successfully makes an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, so you don't only have to use this when you're in danger. You force the target to re-roll and use the lower option. Then you pick another creature within range and they get advantage on the next d20 test they make within the next minute. How the spell is only first level is beyond me. You see, it doesn't give disadvantage, it makes you re-roll. So, if you had disadvantage or advantage, you re-roll with the same conditions. It can make a good situation bad, and it can make a bad situation much, much worse. It can also do nothing, because d20s are fickle. Then there are a bunch of utility spells like Jump, Find Familiar, Identify, Featherfall, and many, many more from the wizard spell list that you can take and rock out when the situation calls for them. They will just turn you into a more well-rounded adventurer. With second level spells, this is where things get more exciting. However, note that you only get second level spells at level 7, the same level that full spellcasters get 4th level spells. As such, I've stayed clear of any damage dealing or crowd control options, because they just don't really compare. Anyway, Shadowblade is really strong on an Eldritch Knight. This summons an imaginary people opener that you can use to stab people's brains without leaving any marks. It deals 2d8 psychic damage, has the finesse, light, and thrown properties, and while it doesn't have any weapon mastery properties, it gives you advantage on attack rolls when in dim light or darkness. If you're dual wielding, then this thing slaps. It also deals an extra d8 when upcast. However, be aware that you can't technically use any of your weapon cantrips with it as it doesn't have a monetary value. Feel free to debate actual and perceived value with your DM though. Enlarge Reduce is another spell that gives more damage on all weapon attacks, a d4 specifically, so it's not huge. But you can use this spell to grow by one size category, and giving yourself a bigger footprint on the battlefield has its own benefits. You could also choose to shrink yourself if you really wanted to. Magic Weapon is a classic and can be used to make a people open magical and give it a +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls. This spell is often overlooked, but it's decent if your DM is neglecting you and giving all the juicy loot to your party members. Then Blur and Mirror Image are two excellent defensive options. Blur gives attacks against you disadvantage, and Mirror Image spawns some illusions of yourself to completely avoid a few attacks. Misty Step is an excellent mobility tool to either get out of dodge or teleport straight in and smash some faces too. Third level is where the more broken spells pop up for the Eldritch Knight, but once again you only get access to these at level 13, so any hope of taking spells with pure damage output while the wizard has 7th level spells is going to crush your enthusiasm. But remember, these are just suggestions, take whatever tickles your pickle. Spirit Shroud is basically a bit of a progression on from Shadowblade. This lets you deal an extra d8 with attacks against creatures within 10 feet. It also prevents them from healing and lets you reduce the speed of nearby enemies when they start their turn. Now, upcasting Shadowblade with a 3rd level spell slot is going to have similar results to this spell, but overall, due to many factors, Spirit Shroud is a bit better. Unless your weapons are crap or you don't have any weapons to speak of. Haste is the other big hitter spell at this stage of the game. This doubles your speed and gives you extra AC, better dex saves, and an extra action that can be used for a few things, namely the attack action to make one single attack, which can be replaced with a cantrip. Later on, this spell falls off a bit, but the potential to spam out Booming Blade is kinda gross. Keep in mind that if you lose concentration, you are effectively stunned for a turn. Fly lets you fly. This can be great, especially if you're going ranged. It also makes you really mobile. Thunder Step is like an upgraded version of Misty Step, except it adds a thunderous explosion and lets you take a willing creature with you. I've also added Hypnotic Pattern here because it's an amazing spell, and by this level you have had the chance to pump up your intelligence somewhat. You can also prime a few targets and give them disadvantage on their saves if you wanted to. Finally, at level 19 you get your 4th level spells. Nothing here is going to push the needle further to any crazy degree, however, but there are some decent options. Conjure Minor Elementals is not broken on an Eldritch Knight, but is probably the strongest option we can take. It adds 2d8 damage to all attacks you make against creatures within 15 feet of you. It also turns that area into difficult terrain for what it's worth. Upcasting Spirit Shroud gets the same amount of damage, but it has less range. Choose whichever one you like. The extra cantrip from Haste doesn't keep up with the damage here though. Greater Invisibility will hopefully take you off the list of targets for your enemies, giving you advantage on all attack rolls in the process. Stone Skin is a reasonable defensive option that can be used to resist bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, a useful tool when confronted by an army of peasants. And Dimension Door is the final version of your teleporty shenanigans. It has a range of 500 feet and doesn't require sight to work. Just a vague description that totally won't put you in more danger than you're already in. It can also be used to taxi one other creature around. It's pretty good. Before we move on, I will just mention that concentration is going to hold you back here a bit. Throughout all the spells you have access to, anything that increases your damage output requires concentration, apart from the cantrips, so keep that in mind. Okay, here are a few things to remember as a fighter. Your entire identity is that you make a boatload of attacks. Get used to it and embrace it, cause it's awesome. On top of that, you have a d10 hit die and don't roll over to a stiff breeze like most of your friends. You are very well suited for life on the front lines. Then you get access to a fighting style and weapon masteries. These will inform what choices you make for your weapons and playstyle. Action Surge is the reason my channel has its name. You get this feature at 2nd level and you can use it to go ham every now and then, practically doubling the number of attacks you make in a single turn. It feels amazing to use and is the reason fighters can be deadly on command. Then Second Wind is a defensive feature used to heal yourself, however it has some out of combat utility too. Gone are the days of the smooth-brained, I'm not doing anything unless we roll initiative type fighters. Thank you 2024 PHB. Indomitable is an outrageously powerful defensive feature. This lets you re-roll a failed saving throw, adding your level to the result, which is a casual +9 when you get this feature. It basically lets you automatically succeed on crucial saving throws later on. Finally, fighters get access to more feats than other classes and can therefore customize themselves with more freedom. If you want to pump your ability scores, go ahead. If you fancy taking as many weapon-based feats to become a master of warfare, well, that's an option too. Alright, considering that there are so many different ways to build a fighter, we're going to tackle this in terms of playstyles. I'll give examples of what fighting styles suit it best, what weapon masteries you want to focus on, and of course what feats will enable your desired people opening skills. Very briefly, I see there being 4 main playstyles or builds you might want to lean into as an Eldritch Knight. Those being using a big 2-handed weapon and wading in, using 2 smaller weapons and making as many attacks as possible, using ranged weapons to keep your enemies at a safe distance, or picking up a stick and using your brain and magic to their full effects. Starting off with the 2-handed playstyle, you're going to want to consider taking Great Weapon Fighting as your fighting style. This lets you treat 1s and 2s as a 3 when rolling damage for 2-handed and versatile weapons. This isn't the biggest boost in power, so taking the defense fighting style for extra AC is also a common choice here. Then you obviously want to use big weapons like the Great Axe, Great Sword, Maul, or any of the polearms. And those have the cleave, graze, or topple properties. These let you make extra attacks on nearby enemies, push through and deal damage despite missing your attacks, and obviously topple your opponent to the ground where they have to lie down and take the oncoming beating. For feats, Great Weapon Master is going to give you more damage on your attacks using the attack action. It can also let you make an extra attack as a bonus action. Polearm Master also lets you make smaller bonus action attacks as well as allowing you to react to incoming enemies with more attacks. Sentinel makes your opportunity attacks pretty cheeky too and more frequent. The two-handed playstyle generally requires you to focus on a strength build. If you believe that more is actually more, then taking the two-weapon fighting style is going to be the way to go. This lets you add your ability modifier to the damage of attacks made with the light weapon property and another feat we'll cover shortly. Smaller weapons like scimitars and short swords have the Nick or Vex masteries. These let you make the light weapon properties attack as part of the attack action, thus opening up your bonus action, as well as letting your consecutive attacks on a single target get advantage as you focus them down. Dual Wielder is an essential feat for this type of build. It lets you make an extra attack as a bonus action using a second weapon. This is independent from the light weapon property attack, by the way, and can be made with any weapon that lacks the two-handed property. However, ignoring that last part isn't really going to decrease your damage by a significant amount. Then Defensive Duelist lets you boost your AC as a reaction, to the point that it's more effective than the shield spell at higher levels. You must be using a finesse weapon for this to work, but scimitars are cool, so it isn't really an issue. There is also a weird version of this build that takes Great Weapon Master and juggles weapons to always use the best weapon available for each individual attack. But this method requires some planning and understanding of when to swap weapons and only really starts getting effective once you have a lot of attacks. In general, the two-weapon playstyle can be built with either strength or dexterity, and it usually boils down to what type of armor you want to wear. Now, the ranged playstyle is actually a collection of a few different ways to build your fighter with some minor differences here and there. So, generally, you want to pick up the archery fighting style for extra accuracy, but the thrown weapon fighting style adds extra damage when you chuck stuff. Depending on your choice of ranged weapon, they're going to have the Vex, Slow, or Push masteries. As mentioned, Vex helps focus down targets, and Slow and Push do exactly what they say. Great for keeping your foes at bay. If you're wanting to use thrown weapons, then look for the Nick mastery as it frees up your bonus action. Dual Wielder is also an option here because the extra attack doesn't need to be made in melee, just with a melee weapon. However, the feats you want for the proper ranged experience are as follows. Crossbow Expert if you plan on using crossbows in any way, shape or form. They can only make a single attack per action without this feat after all. Additionally, this opens up the double hand crossbow experience. Combining this with a thrown weapon makes for a pretty decent John Wick cosplay concept. Then, Sharpshooter will improve your odds of hitting targets in cover as well as at long range. Both of these feats let you tech into crossbow or bowcutter to pew pew up close and personal. Just a note, the extra damage portion of Great Weapon Master also works with longbows and heavy crossbows as they have the heavy property, so take that if that's your jam. Ranged builds almost always exclusively focus on dexterity. Finally, we have the S&S playstyle. For other fighters, this stands for Sword and Shield. For us, though, this stands for Shillelagh and Shield. So, keeping to the order, you're going to take the dueling fighting style for more damage while wielding only a single one-handed weapon, a glorified stick in this case. The defense fighting style is also an option here if you want to lean into the tank mentality, not that that is a serious thing in D&D. Anyway, the sticks you'll be using, clubs and quarterstaffs, have the slow and topple masteries, and we've covered those. So moving on to the most exciting part of this playstyle, Shillelagh. This is a cantrip available to druids that you can get by taking the Magic Initiate Origin feat. The spell lets you turn a club or quarterstaff into a literal battering ram. It makes the unassuming stick you're holding deal force damage and deal more damage based on your level, capping out at the same damage as a greatsword. It does require a bonus action to set up though. Most importantly, this lets you use your spellcasting ability for the attack and damage rolls of the weapon, so you can focus on intelligence. This means your spellcasting is also a lot better, but it won't change the fact that your spells are underwhelming for the levels you receive them at. Shield Master is another decent feat to take if you plan on wielding a shield. This lets you weaponize your shield and bash your enemies as a bonus action, knocking them back or down. However, this scales with strength and not intelligence. You can also block some nasty effects with your shield, reducing the damage you take from explosions. If you want, you can cast Shillelagh on 2 different sticks to dual wield them. However, this takes 2 turns to set up and they don't have the Nick mastery, so you're going to be going with the old 2-weapon fighting rules. The Shillelagh and shield build focuses solely on intelligence. Alright, here are a few other feats that don't necessarily feed into any single playstyle for an Eldritch Knight. Warcaster lets you perform the somatic components of spells while your hands are occupied. You can't slap your arcane focus onto your weapons or shield unless you have a special one, so this is pretty important to be able to actually cast your massive weapon cantrips. It also lets you use said cantrips in place of opportunity attacks and makes it so you almost never drop concentration on a spell. Fey Touched and Shadow Touched give you access to extra spells as well as some extra uses to make up for your general lack of spell slots. Hex and Hunter's Mark are two decent options that can bridge the gap until you get access to some of your stronger spells, depending on which of these two feats you took. Also, Invisibility and Misty Step are amazing spells in their own right. Mage Slayer is a flavorful pick that lets you show off your dominion over magic as it lets you automatically succeed on an intelligence, wisdom, or charisma saving throw. Now, this is basically something you already do with Indomitable, but why not double down? Also, you're an absolute nightmare to anyone trying to concentrate on a spell while you're poking and prodding them. Then we have Metamagic Adept. This gives you 2 sorcery points and lets you choose 2 metamagic options to learn from the sorcerer class. Now, there isn't a choice here. You're only taking this to get access to quickened spells so you can cast a cantrip as a bonus action. This means that if you just so happen to have haste going, you can cast 4 booming blades in a single turn if you use action surge. A bit disgusting if you ask me. For origin feats, take tough if you want more hit points, or take magic initiate if you want more spells. For species, I have no strong opinions, and you really can't go wrong as a fighter. However, the gimmick we're going with this time is a complete disrespect for magic. You wield it in the way that you do, and if anyone tries to show you how it can be more powerful than whatever you're doing, by targeting you with a spell, well, that's just not going to work. So, choose for your character to be either a satyr or a yuan-ti. Goats and snakes are resistant to magic after all, right? And both these species get advantage on saving throws made against spells. In addition, satyrs move fast, counters fey creatures, are fun at parties with their proficiency in performance and persuasion, and can jump higher than the average adventurer. Yuan-Ti are resistant to poison, have dark vision, and can cast poison spray and suggestion. They can also make friends with snakes really easily. It's pretty awesome. Finally, let's go over a few multi-class options. Now, considering that this is a fighter, it kinda pairs well with anything. However, because a barbarian's rage prevents you from casting spells or concentrating on them, I advise you avoid them entirely, but everything else is fair game. As for some specific examples, taking 3 levels of wizard and picking up the war magic subclass is a fantastic combination. This bumps up your overall spellcaster level and gives you better initiative rolls. Most notably, the arcane deflection feature gives you a weaker version of the shield spell that doesn't cost a spell slot, but also improves your saving throws. Now, this feature does prevent you from casting leveled spells after you use it, but this is a non-issue for Eldritch Knights as you'll mostly be casting cantrips round after round. Then I'll mention it here because it's definitely interesting, but it is debatable whether taking 6 levels of Bladesinger Wizard is going to work or not. So the initial feature Bladesong is amazing and will make you proper tanky, but I want to focus on the 6th level feature they get, named Extra Attack. If that sounds familiar, it's because your 5th level fighter feature has the same name and does almost the same thing. However, the Bladesinger version also does exactly what your war magic feature does too. It lets you replace one of your attacks made with the attack action with a cantrip. The question here being, can they both apply at the same time? It's obvious that the extra attack it provides doesn't stack, but it might not be so simple for the cantrip thing. What do you think? I'm not going to weigh in too heavily here, but I do really just want to bring it up because I think it's an interesting discussion to have. Is it too strong? I don't really think so. As always, if you're planning on using something like this in a game, check with your DM when dealing with grey areas. The Valor Bard also has this feature, but going down the Bard route doesn't mesh as well as a wizard. Lastly, Eldritch Knight works well when mixed with an artificer. Now, it can be any subclass. I can see all 4 of them adding something to a character to a greater or lesser extent. However, the Battlesmith and Armorer subclasses work very well. They both allow you to use intelligence for attack and damage rolls, and it's up to whether you want to use your armor as a weapon or to have a mechanical buddy around to keep you company. But yeah, Artificer and Wizard just fit better thematically and mechanically than the other classes, although I'm sure there are some much stronger combinations. Going the full 20 levels as a fighter is tempting though. 4 attacks per attack action is serious business. Alright, that was the Eldritch Knight Fighter. I think it got significantly improved with the change to War Magic in the 2024 Player's Handbook. I'm not sure if it's the absolute best fighter subclass, but I'm pretty sure it's reasonably close to being at the top. But what do you think? Anyways, if you've made it this far in the video, then you're a legend and I really appreciate you. What's your favorite gish in 5e? The Eldritch Knight definitely has the swordplay down, but it lacks the spellcasting power of something like the Hexblade or Valabard, or even the ridiculous Tensor's Transformation Wizard build. But yeah, that'll do it for this one. Cheers.